You're listening to Spurscast, episode 652. My name is Paul Garcia, and I'm your host here on the Spurscast. Today, I'll be joined by Project Spurs writer Collin Reid. In this episode, Collin and I will dive into the Spurs going 8-2 in their last 10 games and making the play-in tournament, Keldon Johnson's 20-point games, and much more. Let's jump right into this episode. Collin, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm a real person, as the people can see today for the first time ever. I'm not just an AI with a voice. So excited to be trying out this new format.
Yes, Spurscast listeners, if you're, obviously if you're listening to this, you're listening to this. But for those of you that like the visual format, we are actually bringing the Spurscast to a video production as well. So now, if you follow us on YouTube, our Project Spurs page, I think it's called the Project Spurs Network. You can actually see these videos that when I record with guests live, so you can actually see me and Collin here on camera. And there's going to be a little bit more incentive to watch it video format, because I know in the Spurscast, if you listen over the years, you know that I throw a lot of stats out there, and so these stats will actually be projected to you, where you all can actually see these stats in real time. So, Collin, let's jump right into this. I know that we haven't talked about the Spurs in a while. So since the last time we talked about the Spurs, they've played 9 games. They've gone 7-2 in those last 9 games. So let's talk about. I don't want to go too detailed into who the specific games, but let's just talk about who have they beaten and who did they lose to during these 9 games. Over these last 9 games, they beat the Golden State Warriors, they beat the Portland Trail Blazers 3 times, the New Orleans Pelicans, the Houston Rockets, and the Denver Nuggets. Who did they lose to? They only lost to the Pelicans and the Grizzlies during this time span. So let's focus first on the most recent game, which was Tuesday at Denver. The Spurs were on the road. They win by 19 in a game where Denver was favored by 9. There was no DeJounte Murray still. He's dealing with that upper respiratory illness. The Spurs took over a pretty big lead early on. They got up by, I think it was 21 was their largest lead. Denver did come back in the second half. They pulled within 4, but the Spurs found the answers, and they were able to kind of have a pretty good, comfortable lead there in the fourth. Coach Pop and the players talked about how the game plan was to make Jokic basically beat them by himself. So they said, Pop even said, whether he gets 50, we're going to kind of live with that. And that was their approach. Jokic finishes with 41. I think Aaron Gordon had 18 as well, but that's about it. Denver didn't have much else scoring and help off the bench or in their starting unit. And so, and the Spurs didn't want to double on Jokic. And so that was kind of their approach, and it worked out, and they ended up coming up with an upset win by 19 over Denver. So, Collin, what are your thoughts on these last, 9 games and specifically that most recent win against Denver?
I think that the Nuggets game was actually probably their most impressive win. Just kind of looking at this list, the Grizzlies game, that was so close. If they would have gotten that would have been a legitimately very impressive win too. You look at these, and not to take away anything, because earlier in the year the Spurs would have lost these games, but the Warriors, they're missing Steph. They're kind of trying to figure out their footing going in to the playoffs. The Blazers are obviously one of the biggest tanking teams in the NBA right now, even though their record is still a little bit higher than some of those other teams. They have like maybe the strongest tank effort going on currently. The Pelicans are probably in a similar tier to them in terms of talent, and they split those 2 games. And then the Rockets are another tanking team. So that Nuggets game, I think, was legitimately impressive, specifically because they have some games coming up where they're playing teams that are, maybe not like head and shoulders better than them, but teams that you'd expect to be better than them that could win their games against the Spurs. And I think the Spurs really needed to win one to kind of clinch that play-in situation, especially to clinch it so early. That was easily the best win. I think all of them were good. I think the fact that they played the Grizzlies down to the last possession was pretty impressive as well. So it's a really good stretch for this team that has had several really good stretches this season, kind of surrounded by some pretty rough basketball. But I guess this is the right time to have one of those good stretches.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that was my takeaway as well. We're going to dive into this in a little bit, but, I would see them beat like you said, the Blazers. They beat the Rockets. You're like, okay, they're supposed to win those games. So that's why I don't want to put too much into those numbers. But then when you see them beat teams like the Pelicans, like the Warriors, like just last night against the Nuggets, that's actually very impressive, and it shows that yes, this team is onto something if they're doing that against good quality teams as well, not just the bad teams. So let's talk about how the teams where they stand overall right now. They should have gone 5-4 in their last 9 games. They outplayed Vegas and they went 7-2 there. They are 34-45 seasons. They have secured a play-in berth. So they have a chance right now for 9th or 10th. It's most likely going to be 10th. They're 1 game behind the Pelicans in the standings, who are 9th. They have secured a play-in game, like I mentioned. They now have the 9th worst record because they're winning more games, which means they have a 20% chance at a top 4 pick and a 4.5% chance at number 1 overall. And that's only if they don't get into the actual playoffs, because if they jump into the playoffs at the 8th seed, well, then they end up getting out of the lottery and they swap places with whoever they beat there in that 8th seed game. Yeah, so they're still 15th on offense, but we're going to dive into their numbers lately in a little bit, and then they're now 17th on defense. So we've seen a little bit of improvement. They have 3 regular season games left, and like I said, DeJounte Murray's been dealing with this non-COVID upper respiratory illness, where it's almost felt like he's going to come back, and then it just seems like it's just delaying he's out even more, and he is out Thursday when the Spurs play at Minnesota. And I mean, there's so much news going on with the Spurs, like how well they've been playing. I completely forgot Manu was inducted to the not inducted, but he was announced as a Hall of Famer, and I was actually at his press conference. Like I prepped the entire episode, Colin, and I was like, wait a minute, I forgot about Manu. Manu's going to be a Hall of Famer soon. So I know that, we're going to definitely probably spend some more time on Manu in the offseason. I definitely want to share some thoughts about his press conference. And then just lastly, it's going to be very difficult, but there is a path for the Spurs to pass the Pelicans and get 9th, which means home court advantage in that playing game. The Pelicans would have to go 0-3 and the Spurs go 1-2, or the Pelicans go 1-2, the Spurs go 2-1. The Pelicans go 2-1, and the Spurs go perfect down the stretch here. And the Pelicans have a, the schedule is they play the Blazers, which they're probably going to win that game. They're playing at Memphis and then versus Golden State. Again, Memphis can basically start resting their players. They have that 2 seed locked up. Golden State is kind of still jostling for position. And then the Spurs' schedule to close the year out is at Minnesota Thursday, then versus Dallas on Saturday, and then at Phoenix on Sunday. So I know that's a lot of information, Colin. What do you want to discuss there regarding the Spurs, how they're doing right now?
So 2 things. One, a little bit more pessimistic. I am a little bit worried about DeJounte Murray's ability to come back and be 100% by the playing game, especially as he shared his news that he had lost like 7 or 8 pounds from this illness, and he's missing another game. That's something that I think, he will. I would be surprised if he's still out by the time the playing game comes, but I would imagine that that's something that would take longer than a week to like get back to full form from. So it'll be very interesting to see kind of where he's at in that process as he's coming back and trying to kind of get back into game shape and put on the weight that he had before. That does worry me a little bit in terms of where he'll be when he comes back, especially with this team gelling so well, to put in like a 70 or 80% DeJounte Murray. I think that could prove to be a challenge for this team in terms of their play-in games. But the successes that they made the play-ins for the second straight year, they almost made it in the bubble too. So, this is a team that kind of has some of that, I think, momentum to get into that, 8 to 10 range most seasons right now. And that is exciting. And all it takes is 2 games. We mentioned, they beat the Pelicans in their last 9 games. They also lost to the Pelicans, and then they had 1 really good win and another game that was about a really good win. It's just 2 of those, and all of a sudden they're in the playoffs, which is pretty wild. I think for me, what I look at and see here is I would be shocked if the Spurs passed the Pelicans, but I do think that they're probably going to go full throttle against. I mean, they're going to try every single game, but like the Minnesota one is a very important one because at Minnesota could be their second play-in game if they beat the Pelicans. So like, I think that could be like a very important game to like see where they're at currently in terms of, I think if they play at LA against the Clippers with Paul George there and healthy, like that definitely be a pretty tough game for them to win. But I think right now they have an opportunity to go into, a team who likely could be their opponent if they win in their first play-in game for like win this game and you're in. That at Minnesota is important. So it'll be interesting to see what that game looks like because I imagine both teams will be trying Minnesota to get out of that play-in spot and the Spurs to improve their position, but also to try to get, kind of a dress rehearsal against a team that they could be playing to make it into the playoffs.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that. Like this could, you're right. Like if Minnesota losing that 7 versus 8 game, they could easily play San Antonio if they beat the Pelicans there. So I didn't think about that. And I do wonder now how they're going to approach it. I know that there's a few players, obviously Murray's out. And then I think Devin Vassell and Lonnie are both probable. So they may not play, but again, it'll be good just to see kind of what Pop does. Cause it looks like, Minnesota played very well against San Antonio the last time those 2 teams met. So there's some interesting thoughts there from Colin. And again, Spurscast listeners, you all probably saw the news about Manu Ginobili going into the Hall of Fame or getting it. The announcement came out that he's going to be inducted in September. So we'll definitely make sure to address Manu's Hall of Fame, just talk about his career and things like that in a future Spurscast episode. All right, let's move on to our second topic, Colin. And this is just how the team's playing in these last 10 games. They're doing very well right now. They're 8-2 in the last 10 games. On offense, they're normally 15th league average. They're currently 10th, and I've kind of put the numbers side by side. I put that on my Twitter, Paul Garcia NBA. And so if you want to go check that out, you can kind of see a side by side of what the numbers look like for the season versus the last 10 games. And so I've just kind of picked apart some major things that stuck out to me on the offense. I do notice that the Spurs are taking less floaters right now during this stretch. In these last 10 games, they're scoring less in the paint because they're not taking as many shots there. They are getting to the free throw line. Surprisingly, they're getting there a lot more right now. They're taking less mid-range jumpers. They are shooting more threes. And then I just put here their shot frequency. 51% of their shots come from the paint normally, and then right now it's 49%, so there's about a 2% drop. The three-point line, they've increased their volume, like we said. 35% of their shots come from three for the season. Right now it's 40% of their shots. And then, of course, they're taking less mid-rangers. 14% of the shots for the season come from mid-range. Right now it's 11% of their shots. Collin, what have you noticed lately about their shot selection?
In watching last game made this because Trey Jones is taking them. In terms of their shot selection, and it's very exciting to see because that's something that I know that you and I have talked about quite a bit. I think, it's interesting because the difference in the 3-point shot is only 35% of shots to 40% of shots. It's only a 5% difference, but like that 5% difference looks huge aesthetically. Like this team is like letting it fly in a way I've never seen them do before. And it's they're making them, which is good, but even when they don't make them, I think there was a couple possessions in that game last night where a couple players would miss one or two in a row and they would just let it fly still, and they would kind of push the lead even higher. And I would never think like let it fly be a team philosophy for the Spurs, but that's definitely how their offense has looked lately, and definitely more modern for sure. I think a lot of those young guys kind of like taking that mentality. They like kind of coming in and if they have an open shot, they're just going to shoot it without thinking too hard about it. And I think that's kind of helped their offense, and just kind of cutting out some of those mid-range and floater shots that can be inefficient shots for a lot of players. Last night, Trey Jones was hitting all of the ones that he was taking for the most part. But yeah, it's good to see that shot selection improving because 1 or 2 points a game does end up making a huge difference in terms of your ability to win or lose these games a lot of the time.
Yeah, and I'm actually trying to pull up the record because there's something specific to their success is about that 3-point line. Here it is. I have it right here. So one second, my database is taking a little bit longer. Okay, here we go. So when they win or tie the 3-point line, okay, for this season, they are 21-17. So they're over 500 ball club. When they lose the 3-point line in any game, they are 13-28. So again, it shows that team success, winning success is implicated here a little bit here on that 3-point volume. But now, Collin, a big reason too why the Spurs are actually playing so well, and I do want to throw out that some of it is also the schedule. So I have here you can see the opponents that they've beaten during this stretch. They have some. I coded them as easy teams. The Thunder, who are tanking, the Blazers, who are tanking. 3 times you play the Blazers, that's gonna make your numbers lower than the Rockets, who are tanking. So yes, they are playing 5. They played 5 teams that are tanking at this point. But they again, like we talked about earlier, they had some challenging teams that they lost to and that they beat. So like I said, they lost to the Pelicans. That's the one where they got blown out. That was very rare for this Spurs team to get blown out like that. They beat the Warriors. They beat the Pelicans. In New Orleans, they beat the Grizzlies, and then they lost to the Grizzlies, and then they beat the Nuggets most recently. So, and a big part of why they're beating some of these quality teams, Collin, is their defense. They've just completely shifted now, and this is something they were doing when they were at their best in December, when they were going through that stretch run when they had Derek White and everybody healthy before COVID hit the team. This is what they were doing. They were a really good defensive ball club. So right now, again, for the season, they're 17th on defense, but in the last 10 games, they're the 3rd ranked defense. What am I seeing on defense when I look at the numbers again side by side? More points off turnovers for this team right now during these last 10 games. They are at 1 quarter per game where they're holding an opponent below 20 points. And just recently against Denver, they actually held Denver twice below 20 points. I think there was a 14-point quarter or 16-point quarter, and then like an 18-point quarter. So that is elite defense, especially in today's NBA, where almost every team scores 110 per night. To hold an opponent below 20 points in a quarter is just something you don't see these days from the Spurs team, and that's what they're doing right now during these last 10 games. They're really doing a great job of limiting opponent shots at the rim. And then also they're first right now in opponent accuracy at the rim. So they're really, not letting teams score there. They, of course, if you're taking away shots at the rim, you're also doing a better job of not letting teams score in the paint, because that's actually one of their weaknesses for the season. They are actually first in opponent free throw makes, so they're not putting teams on the line. I know that was an issue when they first made the trade with Derek White, where you were starting to see teams get to the free throw line a little bit more against the Spurs, and that was usually a concern for San Antonio, because they're actually one of the better ball clubs of not putting teams on the line. And then I guess my open-ended questions to you is, how much of this is just playing? I'm not trying to mean to Doug McDermott here, but how much of this is just playing better defensive players in your lineups? You're playing Josh Primo. Coach Pop has actually talked about how he's a really good a one-on-one type defender. He's just, again, a young athletic guard, 6'6", can kind of move around, helps out on help possessions, can stay with his man. Then you got Josh Richardson off the bench, and who's also playing like in crunch time. And then also I would also say Zach Collins is a pretty mobile big. The teams are still scoring a little bit better at the rim against him, but their volume shot attempts against Zach Collins have gone down for opponents. So I know it's a lot there, Colin. What do you think about their defense?
So I think if you were to separate kind of positions into like three groups, being like bigs, wings, and guards, I would say that's actually probably the order that defense matters. Bigs are like maybe the most important position on defense, and then wings, and then guards. And so when two of your best defensive players, I mean, obviously Jakob is such a high level rim protector, but when you have DeJounte and Derek White, there are some games where that really does matter. But just because guard defense is not necessarily as important as wing defense, having two really high quality guard defenders is kind of a little bit of like that. You're starting to lose a little bit of the edge that makes that good, because that skill just isn't as necessary in the NBA, where wing defense is maybe a little bit more defense or more important.
Yeah.
So one of the things, not only about McDermott being out, but the roster kind of being shifted around the trade deadline, and just because of some of the injuries, to have some more wing defenders and better wing defenders come into the rotation. Now, all of a sudden, even though you lost a really good defender in Derek White, you kind of have more important defensive positions being kind of held. And even if you're playing someone at guard, if they're not quite as good on defense, well, you have good wing defenders and good rim protectors behind them, and that's okay. So I think just kind of, it's not that, like, Derek White obviously is a fantastic defender, but I think kind of when you take him out of the lineup and you shift things around where you're playing more important defenders in terms of positionally overall, that ends up becoming kind of a big change, even if you're not like playing better quality defenders. So it's kind of an interesting, I think, philosophy aspect, but I do think just playing more better wing defenders has been a huge quality of life upgrade for their defense.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and I just think that there's that flexibility where you can throw zones in there. You can do what you did against Jokic. Just tell everyone, hey, stay with your guy. Yes, he's going to score against Jakob and Zach Collins, but try not to help as much as you can, and you just stay home on everyone. And again, they have, they're not elite defenders, but still they're players who can stay in front of their man right now. When you have Josh Primo out there, when you have Richardson, Devin Vassell, DeJounte Murray, all these players, Keldon Johnson. So I just think that there's just a lot more. I guess I would say flexible. They could just do different things scheme wise on defense, and it did kind of surprise me, the fact that it's just Zach and Jakob at this point as their main bigs, and they're showing these kind of numbers. So again, I know part of it is the opponents they played, they really locked down on some of those bad teams, but again, they held Denver to 2 quarters below 20. They couldn't even do that against the Rockets or the Blazers. Like, they never did that against those teams. So again, I think there's something there with that defense, and that's a good building block for next season. If they can hold on to that, and maybe not win out of the play-in tournament, but maybe show some of that identity there. So I think that's really impressive regarding their team defense right now. And now a word from our sponsors. All right, Colin. So let's go ahead and jump right into right back into the episode here, and let's go to our third topic here. And this is Keldon Johnson. But before when I last recorded a Spurscast regarding like analysis and things like that, I had kind of mentioned how Keldon was kind of starting to change his shot selection a little bit, and so he's actually on a streak right now. And they mentioned this in the broadcast, where he's scoring 20 points or more in 7 straight games. So he's scored between 20 and 28 points in his last 7 games in a row. Now, part of this, again, we can attribute to DeJounte Murray being out for 4 games or 3 games. And their leading scorers out, so they're going to rely on their second leading scorer in Keldon to do a little bit more. But I just want to kind of dive into some of the data and kind of what I've seen as well with the eye test. So his points. So he's scoring 16.9 points for the season. Currently, during the stretch of 7 games, he's averaging almost 23 points per game. His shots, he is getting about 3 more shots, so 13.4 to 16.3. He is taking more threes. That's kind of something I noted a few weeks ago. So from 5 to 7.7. He's getting to the foul line a lot more. Three fouls per game, a shot per game, to now 4.6. Assist, yes, they're going up by about 1, and then turnovers, they barely increased. They haven't been too much. He's also driving a little bit more, like we see here, 7.9 drives to now 9.3 currently. So what have I noticed when I look at his shot chart for the season versus right now? I do notice that his shot selection, and this is actually something I asked Pop about a few weeks ago. I asked Coach Pop, has Keldon's shot selection kind of changed a little bit, or, what is his approach? And he says, yes, that he's taking just better quality shots right now. So as we look at the data, it does say that for the season, Keldon takes 25% of his shots from that floater range. That's a very bad shot to take. And right now he's only taking 17%. So there's a minus 8% decrease right there in taking those bad shots. He's completely taken the mid-range out of his game, which is a good thing right now. So for him, he hasn't quite developed that shot just yet. So he's completely not even going to it. So normally 7% of his shots come from mid-range, only 1% of his shots. It's really just one shot. But we have seen an increase in the most efficient area, which is the dunker layup spot. So he's for the season, 29% of his shots normally come from that dunk layup range. Right now, 35% of his shots in the paint come from that dunk layup range. And like I said, also, when you look at his accuracy, that has also improved as well. He's just finishing a lot better now that he's taking shots closer to the basket. And as far as his three ball, he's still a lights out shooter. It still boggles my mind, and I'm so glad Matt Bonner brought this up on the broadcast. How in the world do defenses still leave him wide open? I was like, are you kidding me? So they still do it. They just do it, and he's going to make them pay, and he does it. He's just an excellent three-point shooter, and no one's just caught up. And it's just, I don't know. I don't know what to say about why defenses continue to leave him open. So, Colin, what are your thoughts on Keldon's impressive 20-point streak here?
Yeah, so I think all of those stats are increases in a good way. The turnovers increase, like you said, just such a small amount. I actually think that the turnover is increasing only by 0.4 per game when you consider the difference of load that he's kind of bearing with these shots and these assists and stuff is actually incredibly impressive as well. And just looking at the fact that, when you're shots increase by about 30% and your shot profile increases as drastically as it does, I do think like that's a winning formula for scoring more points. I know earlier in the season, Keldon was one of the guys that I was really looking at to maybe take a big step this season. And maybe a quarter or halfway into the season, I was kind of wondering like, oh man, is this who he is? Like, he showed flashes, but is he kind of just like a rotation guy? Like, is he? And so like, this is a pretty encouraging stretch to see, like, okay, he definitely has the chops to be an NBA starter. And if he continues to play at this level, like an NBA starter for quite some time, I think you and I are, I'm sure, going to have a podcast or several podcasts talking about the Spurs offseason moves this summer. And one of them will be talking about him getting an extension. And honestly, like, I see that as more likely now than I did, maybe 4 months ago. So just a really good stretch for him, a really good stretch for the team. Obviously, if he did not step up in this way, I think with DeJounte Murray out, the Spurs would still be battling the Lakers for position to get into the play-in.
I think what's really impressive about what he's doing right now, the fact that he's putting up these 20-point games, is that, yes, he gets a lot of his points from the three-point line because teams, like I said, I don't know why teams leave him open. But also the fact that, like, he's kind of still doing it as a secondary ball handler, like in terms of like catching and just reacting and driving. Because like even when you look at 9.3 drives right now in these last 7 games, that's not a lot. If you're really like getting into the teeth of defense constantly, and you're kind of one of the main players who drives the ball, you're getting over 10 at least at minimum. And so that's something that Derek was doing. That's something DeJounte continues to do on this team. And so again, I still see it more so as he's kind of, somebody drives in the kick to him, and he's making it just the smarter choices of driving in really hard or just finding the lanes. He, like Pop actually told me when I asked him about this, he just said he's understanding space a lot better about when to, where to attack, where to get. And so I just really feel like, like he still hasn't even got to that part of his, as far as like being more so like running more pick and roll and just being more of a one-on-one, just attacking players. He hasn't even got to that part of his game yet. And I think that's something the Spurs might focus with him on this offseason. Did you have any other comments about Keldon?
No, I think it is just kind of impressive to see his growth in that way. And I think, you kind of sit back and wonder, like, if the Spurs had, kind of the level of primary creator like a Luka or a Trey, like how good would Keldon look as that secondary creator, someone who, like, you have the heliocentric style offense? I feel like Keldon would fit very perfectly into that. And obviously the Spurs are If they don't make it to the play-in, going to try to find that kind of guy in the draft. And I think that he is showing, because I think for a long time my problem with Keldon was just like, okay, like he can score when he has the ball, but like what is he doing when he doesn't have the ball? When he has the ball, is he making good choices? Is it efficient? All that kind of stuff. And now that we've seen this stretch in kind of the second half of the season for him, like you can see the theory of how he could be a high impact player next to other very high level players. And that was kind of what was missing before. You could see how he could produce on kind of a below average team, but it was like, could he be the same guy on a good team? And I'm seeing that kind of production now that would make me think, once the Spurs start building their core for hopefully their next like playoff level core, that he is a player that could fit into that kind of theory nicely.
Okay, yeah, no, there's some good thoughts there. So yeah, again, Keldon's, he continue on that streak. We'll see how long it goes, whether it goes into the end of the season or maybe just see how long it goes. All right, and then our final topic here, Colin. Let's talk about just two I would say new additions to the team, because again, Zach Collins, of course, he was signed in the offseason, but he really didn't join the team till later as far as physically being able to join the team, because he's now healthy and playing more games. And then also Josh Richardson, who they acquired at the trade deadline. He kind of had a slow start because Pop really wasn't giving him a lot of minutes, but now that there was a lot of injuries to the team, Pop's really trusting him, and he's getting a lot of minutes right now, and he's part of, like I said, part of their crunch time lineup these days for this team. So I really focused here on the last 10 games, because that's kind of when they're playing their best right now, the Spurs, 8-2 in those last 10 games. So let's first begin with Zach. And these are mainly a lot of offensive stats, because we kind of talked about the defense a little bit earlier. Right now in the last 10 games, he is averaging 10.1 points on 7.4 shots. He's collecting 6.3 rebounds. When I look at his overall shooting profile, he shoots efficiently. He scores efficiently, should I say, near the rim. So he's good about getting like putbacks and kind of just doing those little hook-ins around the rim. He also has a pretty good mid-range jumper that I think he's shooting 50% from mid-range right now. As the season has gone on, defenses are starting to kind of dare him to shoot the wide open three. They're kind of leaving him open on those pick and pops and kind of like letting him, so he's looking to more so pass because he is struggling a little bit from that wide open three. And then it's barely a minus, but the teams are scoring less when he's on the floor, 0.3 points per 100 fewer when he is on the floor. Do you have any thoughts about Collins and what he's been doing in these last 10 games?
I think that it is for on defense especially. I know that he's someone who comes in and it's not like, oh, you think you're getting this amazing like top shelf defender or anything, but I do think the fact that like he is kind of a positive on defense right now is a positive sign, just because the Spurs, I think, play a style of defense that can make it easy. Like LaMarcus Aldridge wasn't considered a good defender before he came to San Antonio, and his first couple seasons in San Antonio, he was actually a pretty good rim protector. So I think like that we play a team defense that allows, or not I don't play for the team and I can't see that, but like the Spurs play a good team defense that allows, if the center focuses on his job, then he can be better than maybe he's looked in other places. However, they're also like the linchpin of the entire defense in this heavy drop. Like every time they play pick and roll, the other team, the Spurs big man is going to be attacked by a good ball handler. Like every time down the floor they run pick and roll, Zach Collins is going to be part of that action, especially near the rim. And so like shutting off attempts at the rim kind of in any situation is like goal number one for a Spurs big man, and like the whole defense is built from there on out. So it is a lot of responsibility, but seeing that like he is a plus on defense in this stretch where they have been good on defense, is telling. And hopefully that's something that can carry over to next season, kind of as he has this full season with the team.
Yeah, and again, it's important to just recall that he's only played 25 games, and again, missing 2 years of basketball. And look what he's doing, already for the team. So I think that's a really good sign. If you're the Spurs, the fact that there's just the signs that he's showing, and like you said, the fact that they're playing some elite defense during the stretch, and he's part of that rotation. He's that big off the bench, especially some games where like last night against the Nuggets, where early on Jakob Poeltl got in foul trouble, so they had to go to Zach, and he was actually doing his best out there to anchor that defense. And then the other player we talked about, we're going to talk about Colin, is Josh Richardson, who, like I said, the Spurs acquired him at the trade deadline, but he's kind of started to now kind of fit into the rotation lately, getting a lot of minutes. So how is he doing in the last 10 games, should I say? He's averaging 15.2 points off the bench on 11.2 shot attempts. He's also, like we talked about defense, 0.7 steals during the stretch. And then now looking at his shot this season, he's a dangerous shooter from three right now with the Spurs. He's shooting 44% from the three-point line for the season with San Antonio, which is 18 games. Defenses are worried about him. When you look at the data, they're not giving him many open threes, wide open threes. He's, I think, only 36% of his shots have been wide open. So they are scared of him out on the perimeter. And then, of course, defensively, the numbers show that he's a good defender as well. Teams are scoring 2 points per 100 fewer when Josh is out on the floor. What are your thoughts on Josh Richardson?
I think the Spurs and the Celtics did a really good job. I mean, I think it's kind of cliche to say, oh, this was a win-win trade, but this trade in particular, both teams were able to get needs met, because if you looked at the Spurs kind of halfway through the season and you're asking yourself, well, what do they need? I think a good, competent wing on defense and offense who can kind of fill that role. That's one of the hardest roles to fill in the NBA. That would be top of their list. And the Celtics have that in spades with Jalen and Jason. And they needed kind of that extra guard who's willing to make the extra pass and stuff. So I think they made this really good trade for both sides, and I think that's paying off. I know, like you're saying, he didn't play a whole lot at first. And I think some of that just is, even if their system has changed a little bit, my kind of educated guess is that the Spurs still feel like they run a complicated, system on offense and defense. And I think they're a little bit worried about throwing someone into that without a whole lot of preparation in a training camp and stuff. That's probably a big reason why they weren't making a whole lot of trades on trade deadlines in the past, because, I remember just kind of an offhanded comment that Pop made back when Marco came in the first time, where he said, oh, Marco's been the quickest player to ever pick up our system. And this was a month or two into the season. So their own estimation of their system is that it's pretty complicated. And I think that's probably why they don't trust new players too quickly. But obviously he's kind of stepped in and filled that role really nicely. I think they're not in this play-in mix without him, and they don't make it to the play offs if they are able to make it there without him either. So he has become an incredibly important player for them. And I think that's kind of one of those players that you hold on to for a couple of years and see, can he fit with this core going forward? And that's a really important find for a team in this stage of development.
Yeah, and I think that's why whenever you and I are going to do the offseason podcast whenever that time comes, and that's going to be, he's now one of the interesting questions is what do they do with him, because he is that veteran, but he also has a year on his deal coming up for next season, and he's playing really well. Like you said, he's really added to this core. What happens if they do get into the actual playoffs? They win 2 games in the play-in tournament, and then they're in. And because Josh Richardson's been a key part of that, that again. So it's gonna be a lot of interesting questions going forward with how well Josh is playing. And I think for Zach Collins, he's kind of answered that question, because I know he has a non-guaranteed deal this upcoming offseason. I think he's kind of answering that. Yeah, he's good enough where they're going to probably keep that. So again, we'll kind of get into all those offseason discussions later on in the future once the season ends and free agency and all that kind of stuff approaches. So before we wrap up this Spurscast episode, Spurscast listeners, don't forget to visit projectspurs.com when you have a chance. Thank you for those of you that took some time last week to listen to our episode that we dedicated to Project Spurs founder Michael De Leon. I was really happy with all the writers, and I had a lot of just a lot of people reached out to me, said, hey, that was really cool. Just hearing everybody's stories about how we all met Mike and how he's kind of helped us all throughout our career. So again, thank you all for those of you that were able to listen to that episode. It was a little long, but again, we wanted to get as many thoughts as we could about Mike, but out there in that episode. And then we had our continue to visit projectspurs.com, because we have our game by game analysis by Stephen Michael. He's continuing to write over on Project Spurs after each game. Benjamin Bornstein has continued to get you ready for the draft with his Spurs Prospect Watch series. And I have to give Ben a shout out here, because I just watched the NCAA tournament recently, championship game and all that. I was getting into it. Of course, I know who Brady Manick is, and Ben wrote about Brady Manick, and he has the perfect headline here. So let me read it to you. Just another manic Monday. Brady Manick Prospect Watch. I was like, yes, that was so good. I actually tweeted Ben. I was like, this is excellent, dude. Just perfect. Especially now that I know who Brady, because normally I don't know who the prospects are, because I'm not, you and I aren't really into college basketball. So but I actually took some time, because now the Spurs have a bunch of picks here. I got to know who these players are. And so, yeah, now that I know who Brady Manick is, it fits even better. So it was such a good headline. And then of course, once the Spurs season does officially end, I will be bringing forth again, making a new Project Spurs draft board. So again, we'll be plugging in all of Ben's prospect watches into that draft board along with the different stats and things like that. But again, we'll wait till the season actually officially ends and the Spurs' season is over. So thanks to Collin for joining me here on the Spurscast episode, and also thanks to Joe Garcia for mixing and producing this episode. From all of us at Project Spurs, stay safe and have a great day.